By switching to AAA insurance, we're able to save over $450. More gas in our...
This story is brought to your ears by all our fantastic supporters on Patreon. To get in on the action yourself with bloopers, extras, and the occasional early story, join us at patreon.com/voiceofallmtg. We'd like to thank our newest patrons, Zach Torrance, Eaton Strauss-Cohn, Joseph Watson, Alex Ortiz, Julian Gonzalez, DM, and Carmen Soto for already donating. For more stories or just a chat, visit voiceofallmtg.com. And now, Voice of All presents Old Friends and New, Episode 1 of War of the Spark.
Hikara was waiting for me on the Transguild Promenade. I paused for a second or two to soak her in. I know that sounds ridiculous, but she was my best mate, my hero, my role model. She had bells in her hair, and I wore bells hanging from my shoulders instead of my hair, because I didn't want it to be too obvious that I was totally copying her look, her style, her Hikara-ness. But I was being silly, so I called out and she turned, smiling that big grin of hers, and she called out my name.
Right, come here, baby cakes, and give me some sugar.
No, I am not making
She talks like that all the time. I gave her a hug. She's a lot taller than I am, and she spun me around like we were acrobats in one of her guild's blood pageants, except we were on the ground, not up on a high wire, and there were no blades or actual blood involved. This time.
Tell me what's what, the whole crazy lowdown.
Sure. I followed Master Zarek to Nivix, just like you wanted. Not sure why he keeps ditching you all the time.
I know, right? Why would anyone want to ditch me?
It is kind of inconceivable, but if it gives me the chance to help you out by keeping tabs on him, you know I'm happy to be useful.
You're my rat.
I'm your rat.
Keen. So who'd he talk to?
My girl Hikara was emissary to the demon Rakdos, and had been tasked by her master to keep an eye on Master Zarek of the Izzet League, but said Eiffel kept sending her away. Which is where I came in, you know? Hikara had tasked me to follow Master Zarek when she couldn't. Trailing someone without being noticed is one of my particular skills. My best skill. And, like I said, I loved being useful to my best mate. He shut himself away with his boss.
Niv Mizzet?
Uh-huh.
Shut?
In a lab. A big lab. But it was just the two of them in there alone. I had snuck my way into the Nivix, but I couldn't sneak into the lab before the door shut. And I thought if I tried to open it, they might notice.
Really?
It was a very big door and not well oiled. So I made my way into and through the air ducts.
You're my rat.
I'm your rat. Anyway, I missed most of the action. There was some kind of explosion, so by the time I crawled up to a vent overlooking the lab, almost all I could see was smoke. The vent's fan had turned on automatically, I think, and it was sucking the smoke right in. I was coughing so much I was actually afraid they might hear me. She wagged her finger at me.
No, you weren't.
No, I wasn't. Problem was, I couldn't hear them either. There were a lot of fans blowing, lots of noise. Master Niv Mizzet did not look happy, though. They were both staring at a big machine, which is apparently what blew up. I have no idea what it was supposed to do, but it clearly hadn't worked. It was charred, smoking, even on fire in a couple places, though neither Master Niv Mizzet nor Master Zarek did anything about the flames. I caught maybe one sentence, something about a beacon being their only chance now.
That fits, if anything does.
If you say so.
What else, mate?
Not much. Master Niv Mizzet flew off, Master Zarek opened the door to the lab, and a bunch of goblins rushed in to put out the fires. They were very efficient.
Izzet goblins have a lot of practice at fire suppression, almost as much as they have at fire causation.
Master Zarek pulled the goblin aside and told him to send messengers to Mistress Kaya, Mistress Vraska, Miss Lavinia, Mr. Vrona, and you. I figured I'd better get out of there and give you the heads up so you knew what was what before you answered his call. As if on cue, a goblin came running up. Ignoring me, he bowed before Hikara and handed her a slip of parchment. She patted the goblin on the head and dropped a razor blade in his open palm as a tip. He stared at the thing, glanced up at Hikara's dangerous smile, and then backed away slowly. Once he was about 5 feet away, he turned and took off at a run. Hikara unfolded the parchment and nodded. The bells in her hair tinkled softly.
You were right. It's now or never time. My mate Ral needs yours truly to activate the beacony beacon to summon the Uber Troopers to fight the evil dragon.
Master Niv-Mizzet is evil?
No, different dragon.
What can I do? She looked down at me and stroked my hair. I think if I had an older sister, she'd have been like Hikara. But I didn't need an older sister because I had Hikara.
Well, I'll be with old Rally Boy myself, so you can take the night off. Let's meet back here, just before dawn. If I don't show, it's because I'm still with him. And you can take the whole day off.
You sure?
Sure, I'm sure. Don't need you to follow the guy if I'm with him.
Okay. I think she must have sensed I was reluctant to leave her. She lifted my chin.
Hey, you're my rat, not my moth. I know I'm the brightest light in the multiverse, but no need to hover. I'm a big girl, can take care of myself.
I know that. She took some pity on me then, hugged me and swung me around again. I'm a little old for that game, but honestly, I still love it. She put me down and kissed my forehead.
Gotta go, baby cakes.
Bye, Hikara.
Bye, Arathia.
It struck me as odd that she used my full name. She almost never calls me Aretha, but I shrugged it off. I watched her cross the promenade, then I turned to go. I hadn't eaten in a while, and I was hungry. I made my way to a Sealsnian market, which was just closing, or maybe just preparing to open. I stole a ripe plum. I might have also picked the pocket of an Orzhov ministrant who was collecting a debt from the fruitier. I didn't really need the coins, but they were polished and shiny, and I like shiny things. What can I say? I'm the rat. I nearly went to see the Rakdos perform their Flaming Jubilee, but it felt a bit like I'd be cheating on Hikara, which is nuts. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood. So I wandered, killing time. I thought about going home to the Growlands, maybe spend some time with my folks, but I didn't. I felt restless. They'd be hugging me, and the thought of it made me, what's the word? Claustrophobic. Yeah. I wanted to stay in the open air. Brilliant notion, as it soon started to rain. Not that I mind the rain all that much. I holed up in a doorway, watching Ravnica's sparse night traffic pass me by. They all had places to go, or so it seemed. Finally, hours later, I could taste dawn in the air, so I scurried back to the Transguild Promenade to meet Hikara. She wasn't there. I waited, but she didn't come. She was still with Master Zarek, of course, and wouldn't need me. I knew I could leave, but I lingered for no good reason as the sun began to rise. And as a sand-covered boy materialized right in front of me. The boy, who looked to be about 18 or so, was on his hands and knees coughing up sand. He wiped a sandy arm across his eyes in a futile attempt to clear his vision, then looked up at the sky with a confused and perhaps pleading sort of expression. I watched him because he looked kind of pathetic. I wondered a little where he'd teleported from that had that much sand. Then, still spitting up sand, he lowered his head and looked in my general direction. I kept watching him while absently picking a small blood-red berry off my belt and popping it in my mouth. Told you I was hungry, right? He was bleeding a little from the wound on his forehead, and as I bit down and tasted the berry's blood-red juice, his blood-red blood trickled into his own mouth to mix with all that sand. He spit again, fought off a fit of coughing, and still on his hands and knees, called out for help. Surprised, I pointed to myself and said, "Me?" He nodded desperately and coughed.
Please.
Immediately, I hopped off the railing and raced to his side. Hardly anyone notices me. I'm so insignificant. I helped him to his feet and began brushing sand off his tunic.
Where am I?
Transguild Promenade.
What?
You're on the Transguild Promenade. And there be thrill carts coming through here any second in both directions. So, unless you want to be crushed beneath him, we better move. He let me pull him forward. Running his hand furiously back and forth over his scalp, he tried, and failed, to get the sand out of his hair as we walked across the bridge. I was pretty excited to be meeting someone new, and, as usual, began babbling at my standard mile-a-minute pace. We haven't been properly introduced. I'm Rat. I mean, Rat's not my real name, of course. It's more of a nickname. Folks call me that. Well, not a lot of folks, but you get the idea. My real name, or, my given name, is Aretha. Aretha Shokta. So, Rat's shorter, easier to say. You can call me Rat. I'm not offended by the name at all. Truth is, it's kind of perfect for me. Perfecter than Aretha, I guess. Although, I think Aretha's prettier, My mother still calls me Aretha. So does my father. But they're pretty much the only ones. Well, there's this centaur I know, but he's kind of my godfather, so it's the same idea. Parents get stuck on the names they pick. But I'm fine with Rat. So you go ahead and call me Rat, okay? I'm currently gateless, in case you were wondering. But I was born into Gruul clan, so my parents want me to officially join their clan, except I just don't think I'm angry enough, you know? Plus I have good friends in Rakdos and Selesnya. Yeah, they couldn't be more different. But some days I feel like I fit well in the one, and then the next day the other. Anyway, those are my big three. Gruul, Rakdos, Selesnya. I'll definitely join one of those. Probably. Are you in a guild? I don't recognize the outfit. Oh, and what's your name? That should come first, I guess. I don't talk to a lot of new people, so I may not get the order of things right. I always have so many questions, but I usually have to figure out the answers on my own, you know? That was rhetorical. We just met. I don't actually expect you to know how I get through life instantaneously. Besides, we're having a conversation here. There's no rush. We'll get to all the important stuff eventually, right? How's your head? That's a pretty nasty cut. I don't think you'll need stitches, but we should really get it cleaned up. Get the sand off it and stick a bandage on it, or maybe find you a healer who can cast a little mending spell. I can take you somewhere they can do that for you, but even a little healing magic can get a little pricey. Still, it's such a little cut. They might do it gratis if you ask nice. Or if you're too shy to ask a stranger for help. You seem shy to me, but I don't want to presume too much since we only just met. I can patch you up myself. I mean, I guess I'm a stranger too, but I feel like we're bonding a little. In any case, I'm a fairly decent medic. I've had to learn to do that for myself over the years. It's not like my mother wouldn't do it for me, but she's a Gruul warrior. She's not always available. Besides, I've never really been hurt all that badly, you know? Cuts and scrapes. I'm relatively short, and bigger folks are always bumping into me if I'm not too careful. Ravnica's a busy place, you see. I don't have any healing magic, mind you, and I don't think I have anything I can use as a bandage, but I can steal something easy enough. Or maybe you wouldn't want a stolen bandage. I forget that not everyone's okay with me being a thief. The Azorius arresters wouldn't approve, that's for sure. You're not Azorius, are you? Nah, look at you. You can't be Azorius. I'm guessing you're... Suddenly he stepped into my path and grabbed my arms.
Listen!
I think he kind of scared himself, because he immediately looked sorry for yelling. Frightened, even. Like I might take vengeance or something for getting yelled at. Boy, he does not know me, right? I smiled up at him to let him know I wasn't so fragile. I talk too much, don't I? I spend a lot of time alone, and I talk to myself too much. I'm always telling myself that. Then I get with other people, and you'd think I'd learn to listen more. I want to learn to listen more. So, yeah, I'll listen to you. You still haven't told me your name. Start with that, and I promise I'll listen.
Teo.
Teo. That's a nice name. Are you in a guild, Teo? You're injured and off your game. Is there somewhere I should take you? Someone I should take you to?
I'm not in any guild. I'm an acolyte of the Shield Mage Order.
Huh. Never heard of it.
You've never heard of the Order? How is that possible? What do you do during a diamond storm?
Never heard of a diamond storm either, but it sounds pretty. Sparkly. I like sparkly things. It's kind of immature, but there you have it. If I see something sparkly, I take it. I mentioned I'm a thief, right? He let go of my arms and stumbled over to the bridge's stone railing to look down at the river passing beneath. His eyes went wide, and his hands gripped the railing tightly, turning his knuckles white.
She's never faced a diamond storm? And never heard of the Order? That makes no sense. The monastic order of the Shield Mage is famous. The length and breadth of Gobakon. The people depend on it. Joining him at the railing, I smiled and shrugged, making an effort to speak at a more moderate pace. I've never heard of Gobakon either. He slammed his hand down on the railing and stomped his foot on the ground. This is Gobakon. Our world is Gobakon. You're standing on Gobakon.
I put my arm through his and propelled him forward. Teo, this... Without slowing my pace, I gave a little hop on the paving stones, causing my shoulder bells to jingle softly. Is Ravnica. This world is Ravnica, Teo. I have a feeling you're not on Gobakon anymore. I'm guessing you're a walker.
Yeah, we're walking. I'm walking, you're walking. Of course I'm a walker.
Not that kind of walker. I don't know too much about it. Just stuff I overheard Master Zarek and Mistress Vraska discussing when they didn't know I was hanging around. I mean, Hikara asked me to follow Master Zarek, so it was almost a mission. An assignment, right? She wanted to know where they went when they went wheres without her. That's almost a quote, by the way. She talks like that, Hikara. Anyway, I was supposed to follow them, but I also eavesdropped a bit. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I'm a chronic eavesdropper. I really can't help myself.
I swear by the storm, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I mean, I saw you materialize all covered in sand back there, so I probably should have guessed. But your mind always goes with the simplest explanations first, you know? I figured you knew how to teleport from place to place. Do you know how to teleport from place to place?
No!
Exactly. So what you can do, if I've got this right, is teleport from world to world, plane to plane.
I promise you, I don't know how to do that either.
I think maybe the first time it's like an accident. Or, no, I mean like not on purpose. Like an involuntary flight thing. Like to save your life, maybe? Was your life in danger, maybe? He stared at me wide-eyed. Wider-eyed than he stared at the river, anyhow.
How do you know that?
Yeah, no, I didn't. But I think those might be the rules. Plus, I'm very intuitive, and you were really covered in sand. Buried alive, maybe?
So, I'm not on Gobakon?
Ravnica.
Ravnica.
His accent, which I hadn't really noticed before, seemed subtly more foreign when speaking the word. And you couldn't know anyone here, right?
Just you, I suppose.
I gave his arm a squeeze. Then I'm officially adopting you. Until you're ready to leave, you and I are family. Don't worry, I'll take good care of you. I'm great at that. I've had to learn to take care of myself, you know?
Uh-huh.
So, let's think about what you need to know to live on Ravnica. I glanced up at him as we walked. He looked about the city, at all the buildings and roads and the passers-by, who took zero notice of him or me, and his wide-eyed stare kept getting wider and wider. I started to worry his eyes would just bust out of his head, so I decided that he needed to eat this meal in smaller bits. Okay, here's what you need to know. Ravnica is one big city, and a lot of folks live here. A whole lot. Mostly humans, I guess, like you and me, but plenty of elves and minotaurs and cyclops and centaurs and goblins and angels and Aven and Veldalkin and Viashno and giants and dragons and demons and, well, pretty much anything you can think of. Mistress Vraska's a gorgon. I've only ever seen 3 of those, but I think they're really, really beautiful, you know?
I don't think I've ever seen a Gorgon.
They're striking. You can trust me on that. Anyway, I don't know who runs things on Gobakon.
About Beres? Or no? He just runs the monastery.
So you're like a monk? I thought all monks had to shave their heads.
I'm not a monk yet. I'm an acolyte. And shaving your head is not a rule. Well, at least I don't think it is. Right now, I'm not sure of anything.
Calm down. That's why I'm telling you stuff. So the abbot runs Gobakon. But here on Ravnica, it's the guilds. There are 10 guilds, and between them, they run everything.
They had guilds in Oasis. That's a big town in Gobakon. Well, I suppose Oasis isn't that big.
But it's big enough to have guilds?
Yes, there's a Carpenter's Guild and the Stableman's Guild.
Might be a bad
But
idea.
I don't think they run anything. I think they just got together to drink ale and complain. At least, that was my impression of them. I was only in Oasis for a few days.
Well, our guilds are kind of a bigger deal. Although I'm sure they drink ale and complain as much as they do anything. I know my father drinks ale and complains a lot, and he's an important warrior in their Gruul clans.
So you're in this Gruul Guild?
I told you already. I'm gateless. That means I haven't committed to any guild yet. Gruul, Rakdos, Selesnya, they're all kind of wooing me. I'm in high demand. I'm kidding. I am not in high demand.
Alright, if you say so.
You're sweet.
I am?
I think so. I like you already. I'm glad I adopted you.
I think I'm glad of that too.
He was looking at me in a way that made me feel... well, I don't know how it made me feel. Is this what embarrassment feels like? I looked away and said, "Stop it," to myself. Or did I say it out loud? Please tell me I didn't say it out loud.
What else do I need to know?
Let's see. The guilds are always fighting with each other. It seems idiotic to me. It feels like they should all be able to get along since they're all so different. What they care about barely overlaps. But they think being different means they need to pick at each other and stuff. So if things start to get out of control, the conflict's supposed to be resolved by this guy named Mr. Jace Bellerin. He's called the Living Guild Pact, which means whatever he says goes. You know, magically. Problem is, he's been missing for months and months. I think he's like you, traveling from world to world. Only on purpose, maybe. Anyway, with him gone, things have gotten iffy, you know? The guilds all tried to get together to stop some kind of evil dragon who's supposed to be on his way, but Mistress Vraska, she's the Golgari Guildmaster, assassinated Mistress Asperia, the Azorius Guildmaster.
Wait, she killed her?
Uh-huh. And now the guilds all hate each other. Or, you know, don't trust each other anymore.
And the evil dragon?
I don't know. I guess he's still on his way.
We turned a corner and I stopped in my tracks. We'd meandered our way to the 10th District Plaza, and I found myself staring up at a tall obelisk in the center of the plaza topped by the statue of a dragon. An evil dragon, if I had to guess.
Huh. That's new.
I'd barely had time to register the brand new obelisk in the center of the plaza when my eyes focused on the massive pyramid at the far end. Sometime very recently, it had risen out of the ground, displacing buildings and gardens and whatever else used to be there. The whole thing hit me as so overwhelming. I could hardly remember what things had been in that spot only the day before. Had those things been so insignificant? The irony of someone like myself forgetting wasn't lost on me, you know?
Hey, is that the evil dragon?
I am not making
At first, I thought he was talking about the statue atop the obelisk, but his eyes were also focused on the pyramid. Sure enough, atop it sat another dragon statue, except this statue suddenly turned its head to look in our general direction. I was pretty confident it wasn't looking at me, which led me to believe Teo might be right when he said,
It feels like he's looking right at me.
That doesn't seem likely.
or at any rate, I started to say that. But the last half of my sentence was obliterated by a loud sonic boom and a rush of dry desert air from behind us that literally knocked Teo and I off our feet. I scampered up first. He remained on his hands and knees, shaking.
Wake up! Wake up! Come on, wake up!
I turned to look as the sound of crashing masonry echoed across the plaza. A gigantic portal, easily 50 yards tall, had opened up behind us, instantly decimating the embassy of the Guild Pact, shearing it right in half. Soft violet light poured forth from the portal. It almost looked soothing, you know, except for the destruction the tear in space had caused and was still causing. An ogre stumbled forward before collapsing. A full quarter of her body had been evaporated by the portal's arrival. The embassy's crumbling facade fell, crushing 2 more bystanders beneath it. It was a horror show, and not the fun Rakdos type. I looked back over my shoulder towards the dragon. We were too far away for me to see the expression on his face, but I'm a little bit psychic, and his mental gloating radiated off him in waves. His gloating and his name. Bolas. Nicole Bolas. It sent shivers down my spine. And then it all got worse. A raven-haired woman in an elegant black dress stepped gingerly up onto some wreckage. She reached the top of a fallen balustrade, stood up straight, and paused.
Something's emerging from that geometry.
It took me a moment to realize he meant the circular tear in space. I looked towards it. An army. An army was marching through the portal. They shone a metallic blue in the morning sun. I thought they looked pretty, but I'm not a complete idiot. An army marching on Ravnica is not a good thing, no matter how shiny it is. The raven-haired woman raised some other shiny thing to her face. When her hands came away, I could see it was a metallic veil of burnished gold chain links that also glinted in the sunlight. Her exposed skin began to glow with purple lines, etchings like tattoos. I thought maybe I heard her scream, but I wasn't sure if she was screaming out loud or just in her mind. Or just my fears, you know, projected. As her bare arms glowed brighter, the metallic army began to glow as well. Even from this distance, I could see their eyes turning purple to match the color of Miss Ravenhair's tattoos. At any rate, the army stopped as one and turned to look her way before, with a clear wave of her arm, she ordered her shining forces to turn and march toward everyone, toward all the folks still recovering from the portal's destruction, and all still standing there, stupidly staring at the approaching horde.
What do we do?
It frankly hadn't occurred to me to do anything, except maybe run and hide. Instead, I stood there, silently frozen, as the first of the Meta warriors reached a young human woman. who was trying to free her husband or boyfriend or brother from under fallen stone. She looked up at the approaching warrior. She didn't move a muscle as it stepped up and quickly snapped her neck. We were some ways away, but we heard the crack. Felt it in our own bodies.
What do we do?
I didn't know. The carnage continued as the advancing army continued its march, killing everyone in its path. As they approached, I could see they were undead creatures. Humans, minotaurs, aven, and other species, covered top to toe in some kind of metallic blue mineral. Soon they'd get to us. I couldn't think. Couldn't move. Couldn't even talk, which is really weird for me. Suddenly, I heard the crack of thunder. We both turned. It was Master Zarek, firing lightning bolts from his hands, white-hot with electricity at the blue metallic attackers, often taking out 2 or 3 at a time. He strode forward, a look of fury on his face, his hair standing on end, and the blue warriors exploded before him. Mistress Kaya was there, too. She had drawn her long knives to protect a red-haired mother huddled over a red-haired son and had launched herself at the undead killer that was raising a sword over the young woman's head. Mistress Kaya's daggers, glowing purple with her magic, sank deep into the creature's back. It collapsed in a heap in front of the shrieking mother, who pulled her son closer to her bosom and stared up at Kaya, more frightened than grateful.
Run.
The woman snapped out of it and ran with her child in her arms. For some reason, this served to snap me and Teo out of it as well.
Can we help?
I think we can try. I still wasn't quite sure how. 2 more of the shiny monsters rushed Mistress Kaya. The closest and largest swung an axe, but Kaya turned incorporeal, which I knew was one of her mystic talents, and the axe switched harmlessly through her. This seemed to confuse her attacker, and Kaya made use of the time to recorporealize and slash the throat of the incoming second creature. The pale purple light from her dagger seemed to briefly war with the dark purple light radiating from the warrior's eyes and cartouche. But like a poison, Mistress Kaya's powers seeped through the corpse, infecting it. It fell. She turned back to the axe wielder, who swung at her again. Again she went intangible, and again the axe passed through her, leaving her opponent open to take both daggers in the abdomen. He didn't go down right away, and solid once more, she dragged the blades up and gutted him. It was the kind of thing my mom would do. Or Hikara. I wondered where she was. But I was maybe kinda glad she wasn't here. She'd be having too much fun, and might get herself killed or something. Master Zarek, meanwhile, was making a stand from atop a park bench, defending 3 more children, one of whom cradled a rubber ball with much the same protectiveness that the mother had used for her son. Master Zarek was smiting the metallic warriors, one after another, but as Mistress Kaya moved to join him, it was clear they, all of us, would soon be overrun. Soon another of the creatures was on her. Again her body lost substance, and the warrior stumbled right through her. It turned. She turned. She solidified and drove her daggers into its eyes, deep into whatever was left of its brain. It dropped like a marionette whose strings had been cut. But she watched it for a second too long. A mineralized minotaur slammed into her and sent her sprawling across the cobbles. She groaned and struggled to her feet. That's where we came in. Finally. I didn't think I could take the minotaur on a frontal attack, so I ran around behind the beast. He ignored me, continuing toward Mistress Kaya faster than I had anticipated, faster than I could make my play. And then out of nowhere, Teo was there. He stood over Mistress Kaya, erecting a triangular shield of light to protect her and himself from the creature. I guess that's what it means to be an acolyte of the Shield Mage Order. The creature's mace smashed into the triangle, which flashed brightly but held its form. Teo grimaced but held his ground, chanting low. I was both surprised and impressed, and though I had no real reason, as my godfather Baruva would say, to harvest this honor, proud of my adoptee. The Minotaur reared to swing its mace again, but by that time I was ready. I had drawn my own 2, much smaller daggers. I leapt onto its back and drove them down into the beast's neck. It roared and bucked and threw me off. I went flying, though I did manage to hold on to my knives. I landed hard on my butt. Cuts and scrapes, like I said. Suddenly, a bolt of blue-white electricity ignited the creature, which exploded into flaming piles of melting blue. As Master Zarek approached, Teo dropped his shield. A small circle of light at his ear also vanished, and his shoulders slumped. He helped Mistress Kaya to her feet. Master Zarek addressed Teo.
You're a planeswalker.
I mean, what?
How do you know he's a planeswalker?
I was zipping around between the metallic blue creatures, stabbing them here and there to distract them from their targeted prey. I cut the hamstrings of one, and when it dropped to its knees, I stabbed it in the eyes. Well, it had worked for Mistress Kaya. Fortunately, it worked for me too. I scurried back over to Teo, dodging another monster en route, at which point Mistress Kaya looked directly at me.
Those things don't seem too interested in you. What's your secret?
I think I stared at her for a beat. Master Zarek thought she was talking to him.
They're interested enough.
She ignored him and addressed me again.
You okay?
Oh, yes. I just never expected the mighty Orzhov Guildmaster to take any notice of me. Wow, 2 in one day. That's almost weirder than the big hole in the world.
Master Zarek, still under the mistaken impression that Mistress Kaya was addressing him, said,
I'm fine. Sorry. It's the goggles. They're the Firemind's design. I can use them to identify planeswalkers. It's, mildly disconcerting.
Any others around? Planeswalkers, that is. Not goggles. We could use the help.
Master Zarek lowered his goggles down over his eyes and scanned the skies, slowly tracking something downward. I could tell from his expression, and a slight buzzing noise in my brain, that he was having a psychic conversation with someone. I wasn't powerful enough to intercept it, but I recognized the signs. I followed his line of vision and saw 2 humans approaching. 2 were men I didn't recognize, and the third was Miss Lavinia, the former assistant to the Living Guild Pact. You know, Mr. Jace Bellerin, who was also with them. They fought their way towards us. The largest of the men was using an ordinary broadsword to make hash of any creature that came within his reach. Master Zarek unleashed a lightning bolt that took out a couple of the monsters in the force's path. Then the big man shouted.
Chandra!
We all turned. 4 more warriors were fighting their way towards us. 2 human female pyromancers were in the lead. One, with flaming, literally flaming, red hair, fired off tremendous blasts of fire that reduced the enemy to puddles of molten goo. The other, this one with long steel gray hair, was using more precision blasts that were just as effective. Behind them were a male Leonin and massive silver automaton. Both groups of 4 converged beside the 4 of us, and the one-eyed Leonin seemed to glory in the fellowship, raising his arms towards the heavens and roaring in what seemed to me to be somewhat premature triumph. Quick introductions were made. The big man was Mr. Gideon Jura. The other man was Mr. Teferi. The red-haired pyromancer was Miss Chandra Nalar. The gray-haired pyromancer was Miss Jaya Ballard. The Leonin was Mr. Johnny Goldmane, and the automaton, who seemed to actually be alive and sentient, was Mr. Karn. Like Teferi, he had no last name. Seems like a whole bunch of these walkers didn't get one, almost like it was the cost of doing business in the multiverse. I was about to ask Teo if he had a last name, but he was busy attempting to introduce the 2 of us to the others. But he was nervous and muttery, so when Mr. Jura put his large hand on Teo's shoulder and, addressing only him, said,
Good to have you in the fight, Teo and Rot.
It made me chuckle just a bit. Teo tried to correct the impression that Teonrat was his name, but by this time Mr. Jura was shouting,
Form up! The Eternals are still coming. We need to save as many people as possible.
So that's what the Metallic Warriors were called. Eternals. It was a name that didn't exactly bode well for our survival, you know? The elegant Miss Ravenhair, in her elegant black dress, was crossing the plaza from the portal to the pyramid, surrounded by a phalanx of eternal bodyguards. She watched us as Mr. Jura led us forward against what he called the Dread Horde. She watched us lift urchins smaller than me into our arms to ferry them out of harm's way. At one point, Mr. Jura was holding 3. She watched us run interference for bystanders too frightened to mount any defenses of their own. She watched us destroy Eternal after Eternal. And the last thing I saw of her, before losing sight of her entirely, was her shaking her head in pity, if not disgust. I turned to Teo, whose last name turned out to be Verada, by the way, and he just looked exhausted. He was raising shield after shield to protect all sorts of folks, all perfect strangers to him, from these undead Eternals. I was too busy trying to stay alive to read his literal thoughts, but I got the gist. He didn't trust himself, didn't think he could handle the cards he'd been dealt. I leaned over.
Aw, you're doing all right.
He swallowed hard and nodded to me and put up another shield, a shield that expanded over his outstretched hands, giving 2 elven kids the cover they needed to run away from the mineral-covered, or Lazotep-covered, as Mr. Jura called it, Eternal that had been chasing them. His shield held, blocking the Eternal from chasing the elves and giving me the opportunity to use my little daggers on its less-than-eternal eyes. I'd already done that move 6 or 7 times by now. It was really effective. I could just scurry right up to them and stab. The first time I thought Teo might vomit, but he swallowed it back and was now growing used to my trick. I'd never had anyone study my tricks quite this much, except maybe my mother, but I tried not to let that mess with my head. Teo summoned a new shield to block the incoming flail attack of another Eternal.
Teo and Rot, push that one this way.
It's just Teo.
I noticed that whenever he needed leverage, Teo summoned up a small circle of light beneath his right ear. It hung there like a bright, shiny earring that held my attention dangerously. I had to resist the urge to grab at it, resist the urge to stare at it too long. Teo expanded his left-hand shield, transforming it from a circle to a diamond. He smiled just a little, perhaps slightly proud of the maneuver, then used both hands to add dimension to the diamond shield and walk it forward. The Eternal's flail bounced off the odd angle, throwing the monster off balance. Teo leaned in and shoved. The Eternal stumbled back, and Mr. Jura cut off its head real smooth.
Good.
He turned away to attack another of the creatures. Teo smiled again, and I smiled for him. Then he shook off the smile and turned his shield to protect Mistress Kaya's back. Mr. Bellerin shouted,
"We need to summon the guilds. Bring them into the fight."
Master Zarek blasted another Eternal.
I'm not sure that's possible. I can command the Izzet into the field, and maybe Kaya can do the same with the Orzhov.
Miss Lavinia finished his thought.
The rest of the guilds have retreated to shore up their own territories, more suspicious of one another than of Bolas.
And that's not even counting the guilds that already serve Bolas. Golgari and Azorius. Maybe Gruul too.
I couldn't believe Gruul would serve the dragon. I knew my mother and father never would. Miss Lavinia also scowled. She clearly didn't like the idea of the Azorius serving Bolas either. Teo and Mistress Kaya were back to back, parrying blows between 2 Eternals. Thinking I could help, I slipped in between them. I leaned over.
Call Hikara. She'll bring the whole cult.
Mistress Kaya stabbed her Eternal, then paused to shake her head sorrowfully.
Hikara is dead.
And that was it. My world just reeled. It couldn't be. I had seen her only last night. She was fine. She was cheerful. She was Hikara. She was my best mate in the whole world. The whole multiverse. Behind his shield, Teo stared at me with concern.
Hikara was my friend. She knew me. She saw me.
Teo looked the way I felt. Helpless. He wanted to comfort me. Pushing his shield off his right hand and onto his left, he reached over and gave my arm a little reassuring squeeze. I won't pretend I was reassured in the slightest. I still couldn't get my head around what Mistress Kaya had said. I couldn't imagine a world without Hikara in it. Without her laughter, her ricocheting thoughts, her loyalty and friendship. Even without her bloodlust. But Teo was trying, and so I tried to acknowledge the effort with a grateful smile. I had no idea what expression actually appeared on my face. Hikara couldn't be dead. She just couldn't be.
Hikara is dead,
Mistress Kaya had said, and I knew she liked Hikara enough to never lie about that kind of thing. I wanted to believe she would. But I knew better. My best mate wasn't waiting for me on the Transguild promenade. She'd never wait there again. She'd never hug me, or tease me, or tickle me, or swing me around, or talk to me again.
Come here, baby cakes, and give me some sugar.
I'd never hear that again. Or anything like that again. Not the tinkle of bells in her hair. Not the little giggle she made when she manifested a razor blade. Not the snorting guffaws that escaped her mouth when she found something particularly hilarious. It was all gone. The curtain had come down. Her show had gone dark. More Eternals advanced, and I wondered why we even bothered fighting them. Ravnica was dying all around me, and suddenly it didn't seem worth saving. Hikara was dead.
Thank you for listening to this production of Voice of All. As listener-supported entertainment, we rely on you not just for the voices of the characters, but also to keep us going and growing. If you enjoyed what you heard,
by switching over to AAA insurance, we saved over $450. So with our savings, he bought more equipment.
this story is brought to your ears by all our fantastic supporters on Patreon. To get in on the action yourself with bloopers, extras, and the occasional early story, join us at patreon.com/voiceofallmtg. We'd like to thank our newest patrons, Joseph Watson, Alex Ortiz, Julian Gonzalez, DM, and Carmen Soto for already donating. For more stories or just to chat, visit voiceofallmtg.com. And now, Voice of All presents The Path to Opulent. Episode 2 of War of the Spark.
Hikara was dead. That's all I knew. It was lucky, I guess, that I was standing between Teo and Mistress Kaya, who were fending off the attacking Eternals. I don't think I could have fended off a house cat right then. I don't think I would have bothered. My memories of the next few minutes aren't terribly clear. I think Master Zarek said something about his beacon summoning more of those planeswalker types like him and Mistress Kaya and Mr. Jura and Mr. Bellerin and Teo. I guess there were planeswalkers appearing all around us. I think one was a Minotaur. I don't know. Hikara was dead. She should have been a planeswalker. A plains dancer. I could picture that. Hikara somersaulting across the multiverse, visiting different worlds, making them all smile, drawing a little blood. Or, a lot of blood. Plus, if she were a planeswalker, she could have planeswalked out of the way of whatever killed her.
How'd she die?
But only Teo was paying any attention to me, and he didn't know. And then something happened. I really hadn't been paying attention to anyone, but I think someone must have cast a spell. Teo dropped his shield and covered his eyes. That snapped me out of it. Had to. An Eternal was about to brain my new friend Teo. My only friend Teo, with a hammer. Furious, I leapt at it and stabbed it in the eyes. It tottered, then fell. I was seething. I don't ever remember being this angry. I was prime girl material now. My parents would be so proud.
Not every planeswalker is gatewatch material, you know. And some are downright nasty.
You have to assume that, nasty or not, most planeswalkers won't be big fans of Nicol Bolas. We need to split up. Spread out through the city. Save as many people as we can and rally every planeswalker we find.
A bunch of them shouted.
Aye.
Kaya turned to Teo and me.
You two are damn useful. Come with me.
Teo, bless him, was a natural follower. And I wasn't going to leave him alone to die like I had Hikara, so when he followed Mistress Kaya's order to follow her, I followed him. I guess it was a good thing. The streets were dangerous enough that it almost took my mind off Hikara for a little while. Almost. Mistress Kaya was trying to get to Orzhova to summon her guild into battle, but we were a long way from the Cathedral Opulent, and phalanxes and crops of the Dread Horde were scouring the streets of Ravnica, killing everyone they found. The saving grace was that, for whatever reason, the Eternals weren't entering any of the buildings. If folks stayed inside, they'd be safe. For now, at least. So we crossed Ravnica, through streets, byways, and alleys, and we did a fair decent job of saving people as we went. And because we could tell them to find shelter and stay indoors, we didn't have to worry too much about them afterward. And we never had to chase any Eternals inside ourselves. Which was good, because fighting in the open was leastways a bit safer than taking on these creatures in close quarters. I mean, there were only 3 of us, and Teo's thing with those light shields was pretty much only defensive. Don't get me wrong, we needed him. He had our backs, our fronts, our sides, but I don't think he actually killed a single Eternal.
You've never killed anyone or anything in your life, have you?
I killed a spider once.
A giant spider?
How giant is giant?
Was it bigger than your thumb?
No.
Then just a regular spider.
Right. Just a regular spider.
I think he thought I was disappointed in him then. But I think a part of me was glad he was so... what's the word? Pure. Yeah. So pure. He was already insecure, and I didn't want to add to that. So I decided then and there to kind of put Hakara in my pocket for the time being. We had Eternals to deal with, and he needed me now. I'd mourn later. I'd mourn forever.
I'm glad you're not a killer.
Thanks? It's never really come up before now.
Anyway, we tried to avoid the larger contingents, but we did great against individual Eternals or small crops of them. Mistress Kaya did the heavy lifting, so to speak. The creatures seemed particularly vulnerable to her ghost daggers, and they couldn't touch her when she was incorporeal. But they could still see her, and that made her and Teo, with his big, glowing white shields, good distractions for me. 'Cause really, none of the Eternals paid me much mind unless I was already killing him. I'd duck out from behind one of Teo's diamond-shaped shields, dodge 2 or 3 Eternals, and then stab one that hadn't seen me coming, usually plunging both daggers into its eyes and deep into its brain. Then I'd be gone before it hit the ground. Between a couple of these skirmishes, as we crossed a wide but empty street, empty of everything except a handful of corpses that proved Eternals had already been this way, Teo turned to Kaya.
So, are we Gatewatch now?
I don't know. Never heard of Gatewatch before today. Not entirely clear what it is.
The good guys, I think.
Ravnica's equivalent to the Shield Mage Order.
I don't think they're limited to Ravnica. All the members are planeswalkers. Perhaps they're the multiverse's equivalent of your order.
So, the good guys.
Yes.
Then I think both of you are Gatewatch. Not me, of course. I'm not a walker.
I'm not Gatewatch. I'm gateless. That's the rat. Always gateless.
Well, you've killed more Eternals than I have.
I tried not to roll my eyes since he hadn't killed any.
That's such a sweet thing to say, Teo. You're such a sweet boy. Isn't he a sweet boy, Mistress Kaya?
Very sweet.
I'm pretty sure I'm older than you.
That's why I adopted him first thing.
How's that cut? I can't see a scar. Thrown a bit, he rubbed his head where the cut used to be.
Oh, no, it's fine, I guess. I can't feel it at all.
It was nice of Mr. Goldmane to heal it for you. It's not like he wasn't busy with other things, what with all the Eternals he was killing left and right. Wasn't it nice of Mr. Goldmane, Mistress Kaya?
Very nice.
By now, we could see the spiky spires of the Cathedral Opulent looming above closer, shorter buildings. Suddenly, Mistress Kaya took off down an alley running diagonally between 2 buildings. It seemed a strange choice, but I figured she knew what she was doing, so I grabbed Teo's hand and we followed. About 100 yards in, I realized she was just looking up towards the cathedral, taking the most direct route.
I don't think we want to go this way.
We do if it'll get us to Arjova faster.
It's a dead end.
She stopped short and turned to face me.
You might have mentioned that sooner.
You looked so confident. I thought maybe you knew about a secret passage. I mean, there are a lot of secret passages through Ravnica. A lot. And I pretty much know all of them. Or most of them, anyway. But I figured that Guildmaster Kaya might know 1 or 2 I don't, right?
Rat, I've been Guildmaster for a matter of weeks. I've only been on Ravnica for a matter of months. I barely know this city any better than Teo here.
I only arrived this morning.
I know that.
Right. So, from now on, the native navigates. This way.
Still holding Teo's hand. I'm not sure why. I think I just liked holding it. I pulled him back the way we came. He let himself be dragged behind me. Mistress Kaya followed us. I heard them coming before I saw them.
Okay, maybe back the other way.
Why?
A split second later, she knew. Another crop of Eternals had entered the mouth of the alley. Too many for us to fight in this enclosed space. The minute they spotted us, they charged. We turned and ran.
You said this was a dead end.
It is!
Then where are we running to?
There's a door to a speakeasy at the end of the alley. It won't get us to the cathedral, but if we get inside, maybe the creepies will forget about us.
It's as good a solution as any. The Eternals were fast, but they weren't running for their lives. We beat them pretty handily to the end of the alley and the heavy iron door to Crumnan's. Finally letting go of Teo, I tried the handle. It was locked. Of course. Why would it be open in daylight? I banged on the door with both fists. No answer.
It's okay. I can pick the lock.
So can I, but I don't think there's time.
I'll buy the time, don't worry.
I glanced over my shoulder and saw him chant up a largish diamond shield of white light, separating us from the Eternals just a second or 2 before they smashed right into it. He grunted painfully, but managed to maintain the shield, even expanded into a rectangle that spanned the width of the alleyway so that none of the creatures could slip around it.
I didn't know you could do that.
Neither did I. Never done it before. But I can use the alley walls to substitute the geometry. It's like leaning in.
If you say so.
I could hear the weapons of the Eternals slamming against his shield, hear him chanting under his breath, and hear him grunt a little in response to every blow. I didn't know how long he'd be able to keep this up. Something clicked softly.
Got it.
I stood. I grabbed the door handle, but it still wouldn't budge.
It's unlocked. Must be bolted from the inside.
Leave it to me.
She ghosted through the door. She wasn't gone long before her head ghosted back through.
I'll get it open, but you need to hold out a bit longer.
I looked back at Teo. He said nothing, but his eyes squinched shut and he nodded once. He was no longer chanting, just gritting his teeth and leaning toward his shield with both hands, as a Lazatep Minotaur headbutted it over and over, while the rest of the Eternals smashed maces against it or the butts of their sickle-shaped swords. White light flashed at every impact. The shield wasn't going to hold. Mistress Kaya must have had the same thought. She ghosted her body back into the alley and drew her daggers, ready to fight. Fortunately, help came. Once again, I heard the newcomers before I saw them. Heard them whooping and hooting. I smiled and put a hand on Teo's shoulder.
Just a few more seconds. It'll be alright.
Gruul warriors. Ganshakta, Domri Raid, Akamal Kray, Govan Radley, Shiza and Jadira, Bombop and others attacked the Eternals from behind, axes chopping through Lazatep. Tusks piercing, hammers raining down. Ganshakta smashed 2 Eternals' heads together with enough force to shatter their skulls into Lazatep and bone fragments. The Eternals instantly forgot about us and turned to face the Gruul. Teo slumped, dropping his shield. I stood over him protectively with my daggers out, while Mistress Kaya began attacking the creepies from behind. Domri cut off an Eternal's head with his long, weighted scythe.
You must be Guildmaster Kaya, the almighty ghost assassin. Lucky for you, Domri Raid was here, enjoying the bloody chaos!
Your raid?
I had to suppress a giggle, as Domri looked instantly insulted.
Course I'm Raid, who else?
Domri had always been a dumb little twit. I still couldn't believe he had replaced a fine warrior like Borborygmos as Gruul's new guildmaster, and I really couldn't believe Ganshakta was following him. On the other hand, I was glad Domri had led everyone here when he had.
I'm grateful.
Damn right you are.
By this time, most of the Eternals were in pieces on the ground. Domri snorted and shouted to his warriors.
Okay, mates, fun's over here. Let's find us some more.
The Gruul started to follow him back up the alley, Ganshakta taking up the rear. Unfortunately, one of the Eternals wasn't quite dead enough. It was missing an arm, but that didn't seem to trouble it much, and it leapt to its feet with a sword in its remaining hand, prepared to stab Ganshakta in the back. Teo reacted even before I did, reaching out a hand and launching a small but solid sphere of white light at the back of the creature's head. It impacted hard, and the Eternal stumbled briefly, making just enough noise to alert Ganshakta to the danger. He turned in time to see Teo hit the creepy with another sphere. Then Mistress Kaya was on the thing, stabbing up into its guts with both her knives. The Eternal was dying, but didn't seem to know it yet. It was still swinging its sword at Ganshakta. So I jumped on the creepy's shoulders and stabbed my daggers down into its eyes and deep into its skull. It collapsed under me. Ganshakta frowned. I knew he hated being saved by outsiders. With some reluctance, he grunted thanks to both Mistress Kaya and Teo. Ignoring me, he turned and trotted to catch up to Domri and the rest.
Who was that?
The big guy? That's Ganshakta. My father.
So now we were traveling in packs, I guess. Me and Teo Virata and Mistress Kaya were now in the company of Ganshakta, the ogres Govan and Bombop, Akamal, Shiza and Jadira, the Viashino twins, and a handful of other Gruul warriors, shamans, and druids, all led by Master Domri Raid. We soon ran into a phalanx of Eternals, and midway through the fight, the enemy got all sandwiched between Simic on the left and Izzet on the right.
Who are they?
I nodded left.
Those are Simic Combine forces. Terraformers, super soldiers, and merfolk led by Biomancer Vorel.
Then I nodded right.
And those are Izzet League mech mages. That's Master Zarek's guild, led by his second-in-command, Chamberlain Marie.
Wait, which one's the Marie?
The Goblin.
okay.
I'm gonna test you on all these names later.
He shot me a panicked look before he realized I was teasing him. Then he glared comically. I think he likes it when I tease him, you know? We made short work of that phalanx, and now we were 3 guilds strong, but the pack just kept growing. Another battle brought more help. Planeswalkers this time, a merfolk woman named Kiora from a world called Zendikar, and a young human woman named Samet from some place called Amonkhet, which apparently was where all these Eternals originally came from. You couldn't just keep him there? She ignored the comment and me. I guess she was a little too busy fighting and mourning and fighting. She knew the names of every single Eternal she killed. Knew them, I guess, from when they were her friends. Watching her grief, it was hard not to think of Hekara. She'd kill one in grimly state.
You are free, Eknet.
Then she'd kill 2 more.
You are free, Temet. You are free, Niet.
I wondered if Hekara showed up as a mindless, murderous Eternal, whether I'd be able to kill her. Or would it just be easier to let her kill me? When the battle ended, we continued on our way, surrounded by this teeming throng of allies. Mistress Kaya was still trying to get us to Orzhova. Teo was staring at Kiora while trying desperately not to make it too obvious.
What?
You've never seen merfolk before?
We don't have much water on Gobakhan.
I laughed and pointed to one of the Izzet mech mages.
You've never seen a Veldalken?
I know people with black skin, brown skin, tawny skin, and tan skin, but I've never seen anyone with blue skin before.
Laughing some more, I nodded in Jadira's direction.
You've never seen a Viashino?
Maybe some of our lizards grow to be Viashino.
Ever see a rat before?
I've seen many rats on Gobakhan, but none like you.
I laughed again and punched him, real gentle-like, on the arm. I stole a glance at Gan Shokta, who was marching just behind Domri and none too happy about it. My father was used to following Borborygmos, someone he could respect as a leader and a warrior. It clearly galled him to ask as Master Raid's lieutenant, and he stared daggers at Domri's back. I wanted to reassure him that dumb Domri was an ass, who'd lose control of the girl soon enough. But I couldn't figure out a way to navigate that discussion right then. So I just sighed and continued walking between Teo and Mistress Kaya. Besides, we were in another fight soon enough. We'd come up on a cobblestone-covered hill, where the Dread Horde had the high ground. Mr. Vorel shouted a command.
Take them out. Take them all out.
Chamberlain Marie looked ready to tell Mr. Vorel what he could do with his orders, but dumb Domri beat her to the punch with some choice grill cursing, which was all kind of pointless, because the next thing he did was run uphill.
Come on, mates! We don't need these lab rats teaching us how to knock heads!
I could read Chamberlain Marie easy enough. She decided she'd rather be Mr. Vorel's ally than follow dumb Domri's example. So it wasn't the most coordinated of attacks, but Gruul, Simic, and Izzet still stormed the hill together, which was some limited Pan-Guild progress, I guess. Of course, we went with them. Me and Teo and Mistress Kaya and Miss Kiora. I looked around for Miss Samet, but she was already ahead of the pack.
You are free, Hawk. You are free, Kawit.
Just as Teo and I reached the summit, 2 more women materialized within arm's reach of us. Both planeswalkers had warm brown skin, but otherwise Miss Watley and Miss Saheeli Rai, I learned their names later, couldn't have looked less alike. Miss Watley was armored and armed, with a long, tightly braided black ponytail emerging from beneath her helm. She was short, almost as short as me, but powerfully muscled with searching eyes and a grim mouth. Miss Rai wore a long, swirling dress, decorated with shiny gold filigree. She was taller than even Mistress Kaya and wore her hair in swirls atop her head, which made her seem taller still. She was lithe and graceful, with curious eyes and a smiling mouth. Different as they were clearly friends. Attempting to size up the situation, they exchanged a quick glance but stood there doing nothing, a little unsure which side they should be on. Teo more or less answered the unspoken question by throwing up a shield to block an eternal axe that might otherwise have split Miss Rai's skull.
Thank you. Yes, my thanks.
I had seen enough, so I scurried past them both to get to the fighting. I killed one Eternal just as yet a 3rd Planeswalker appeared. This one seemed to be somehow informed of the situation and immediately joined the battle, using her magic to take control of one of the creepies and setting it against all the others. She had long, honey blonde hair, a blue-white hooded cloak, and a long crook staff. She told Miss Kiora that her name was Miss Kasmina, or Miss Kasmiri, or Mistress Kasmagorka, or something. Okay, it wasn't Mistress Kazmagorica. But yes, even I was having trouble remembering everyone's name by this time. I lost track of her soon after, but she did some decent damage with her enthralled Eternal right then and there. So did Miss Watley, who took to the killing of creepies quite well. And that shiny little golden hummingbird that Miss Sahili released sped right through the forehead of one Eternal and emerged out the back of its skull. The Eternal staggered and dropped. I wanted to catch and keep that useful shiny, but the bird never slowed. It repeated its attack on another Eternal, and another. It wasn't all good news. Poor Bombop rushed in too far ahead of the rest of us. He crushed 5 or 6 Lazotep skulls with his stone hammer, but the Eternals soon swarmed over him, dragging him down to stab him about 30 times before any of us could catch up to help. There was also a Simic shaman, I never did get her name, who took a moment too long to cast her spell and wound up beheaded. The fallen head managed to croak out the last few necessary syllables before expiring, and the creepy that killed her exploded in a shower of Lazotep and goop. So, yeah. Setbacks, you know? But the battle was over soon enough. We'd won, and not a single Eternal remained alive, or even undead. Our pack paused to catch our collective breaths, and then those breaths were stolen away at the sound of a remote but ear-splitting crack. We all turned, and from the top of that hard-won hill, we could see 4 immense Eternals emerging from the tear in the world to tower over the distant 10th District Plaza. Whoa. Big.
Son of...
What are they?
They are our gods. But Bolas killed them, or had them killed. Now, they are his. His god Eternals.
Well, sure. Of course. That's what the day was missing. God Eternals. We watched in silence for a bit as the 4 god creepies tore apart what appeared to be Vidugazi, which was strange and horrific for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which was that I couldn't figure out how the World Tree had gotten to the plaza from its home in Selesnian territory in the first place. I felt like crying again. And then I felt like hitting Dumb Domri when he actually cheered.
Woo! You see that? That was Vidugazi they trashed! Croc, they taught those Selesnia troops a lesson.
A couple of his party boys nodded or grunted their agreement, but the rest of us just stared at him, stunned.
Gruul? We're fighting on the wrong side. This dragon's shaking things up. He'll tear the guilds down. He'll tear Ravnica down. Isn't that what we've always wanted? When the guilds fall, chaos reigns. And when chaos reigns, the Gruul will rule. You hear? We're joining the dragon.
I fought the urge to stab Dumb Domri in the eyes by looking to see what my father would do. Ganshakta did not disappoint.
Raid, you'd serve that master?
Partner, mate, not serve.
You don't know the difference, boy. You're no clan leader. You're a follower. I'm going back to Borborygmos.
Dumb Domri looked stunned. Ganshakta scowled down at him, then turned and walked away. I watched him go, full of Gruul pride. Well, it's been a Gruul kind of day for me. Teo looked at me. It occurred to me that he thought Ganshakta should have paid more attention to his daughter. I shrugged. Teo's a good boy, but he didn't understand my family situation at all. Which is totally understandable, because it's kind of odd, and I hadn't actually told him anything about it. I wasn't used to telling people about it, frankly, and I wasn't quite sure how I'd even go about it. But I figured he'd catch on eventually.
Forget Ganshakta. He's an old droop too. This is our moment, you see?
You're a fool, Raid. Bolas doesn't keep faith with those he chooses to bargain with. Do you truly believe you can win his favor unbidden?
But Dumb Domri ignored her, leading his warriors downhill toward the plaza.
Help's on the way, dragon! We'll knock 'em all down together!
Kaya looked angry enough to follow and drag him back, and I was angry enough to cut out his fool tongue. But another crop of Eternals was coming up the other side of the hill. So, with a collective sigh, we all prepared for another fight. I couldn't hear the words. They were meant for planeswalkers, not for someone that was anyone like me. But I felt Mr. Bellerin's mind touch like a stone skipping across the liquid surface of my psyche. But for Mistress Kaya, it was clearly more intense. Distracted, even a little pained by whatever Mr. Bellerin had projected, She was nearly split in two by the axe of yet another Eternal Minotaur before I pulled her out of the way.
Did you hear that?
Hear what? I jumped on the Minotaur's back and, unable to reach around its horns to stab it through the eye sockets, I plunged my two little daggers into its neck. We were still amid the pack. The Gruul were gone. Some had followed Dum Domri. Some had followed my father. But the Simic and Izzet fighters were still with us, as were Miss Sammet, Miss Kiora, Miss Rai, and Miss Watley. My attack on the bull-headed Eternal did little damage, but it got the groupie's attention off Mistress Kaya, which was my main goal anyway. I jumped off and scurried away behind one of Teo's shields. The confused Minotaur looked around for, well, me. It gave Mistress Kaya time to recover and use her own spectral daggers to send that Eternal to its eternal rest. Suddenly, another planeswalker, a huge Viashino with lime green skin, materialized right in front of us. He had just enough time to hiss,
"What is this?"
before a female Eternal grabbed him from behind. The Eternal used no weapon on the lizard man, but what followed was pure horror show. The creepy seemed to draw the Viashino's life force right out of his back, like an Izzet fan sucking up a flame. She absorbed that fire until it glowed from within her Lazotep body, glowed brightly enough to create, or at least highlight, cracks in her Lazotep shell. The Viashino fell, a lifeless husk, as the Eternal burst into flames from the inside out. Then that fire rocketed into the air, shooting like a comet toward 10th District Plaza and the Dragon. The burned-out Eternal collapsed atop the dead lizard, as if they'd been lovers, dying together in a final embrace. We were lucky Miss Watley was already killing the last creepy of this particular crop, because everyone else just stood there in total shock. Just then, I felt Mr. Bellerin's mind touch again. I looked towards a grimacing Teo.
It was Bellerin of the Gatewatch. He said, "Retreat. We need a plan. Contact every planeswalker and guildmaster you can find. Meet us at the Azorius Senate. Now!"
I guess we have new orders.
Thank you for listening to this production of Voice of All. As listener-supported entertainment, we rely on you not just for the voices of the characters, but also...
Meet the new keto-friendly South Beach diet. You get the benefits of keto with...
This story is brought to your ears by all our fantastic supporters on Patreon. To get in on the action yourself with bloopers, extras, and the occasional early story, join us at patreon.com/voiceofallmtg. We'd like to thank our newest patrons, Jay Pizzle, Callum, Riversong, and Meat Reaver for already donating. For more stories or just to chat, visit voiceofallmtg.com. And now, Voice of All presents Rallying the Reluctant, Episode 3 of War of the Spark.
Mr. Jace Bellerin, the former Living Guild Pact, had given the telepathic order.
Retreat. We need a plan. Contact every planeswalker and guildmaster you can find. Meet us at the Azorius Senate. Now.
Well, there's now, and there's now. Mistress Kaya was still determined to make it to Orzhova first, and about 10 minutes later, with Teo and I in tow, she succeeded. But pretty soon it felt like that was all she'd succeeded at. She was immediately greeted by Madame Blaze, her chief servitor. In an attempt to rally the Orzhov to fight Bolas and his Eternals, Mistress Kaya asked Madame Blaze to call a meeting with Syndicate authorities, starting with Matriarch Teysa Karlov, head of the Orzhov's leading oligarch family. 5 minutes later, Matriarch Karlov sent her regrets, claiming she was still confined to her quarters, but she had already arranged for an already frustrated and angry Mistress Kaya to meet with a trio of big shots, each of whom had, I guess, assumed more power over the church since Kaya had assassinated its former rulers, the Obzadot Ghost Council. Known collectively as the Triumvirate, these big shots came in one at a time, each accompanied by a small thrall on a leash that did nothing, as far as I could tell, except make their masters look more important. Pontiff Armin Marov was a human, the patriarch of the Marov oligarchs. He was very old, with graying skin and absolutely no hair, looking very much as if he were already well prepared to join a reformed Obzadot. Tithe Master Slavomir Zoltan was a dangerously handsome vampire, and Mistress Maladola was an angel, a long-ago defector from the Boros Legion, who now acted as the Orzhov's chief warrior executioner. Mistress Kaya also asked Madame Blaise to fetch Mr. Tomik Vrona, who was Matriarch Karlov's assistant, but Madame Blaise returned to report that Mr. Vrona could not be found and apparently wasn't within the cathedral's walls. I knew, from following Master Zarek and Mistress Kaya around for Hikara, that Tomik was Kaya's friend, and I could see and feel her frustration fade, instantly replaced by worry, given the current conditions of Ravnica's streets. So, with Mr. Vrona absent and Matriarch Karlov abstaining, the 6 of us, or 9 if you count the thralls, entered a grand cabinet big enough to hold 10 times that many folk. And the triumvirate did not sit close to Mistress Kaya or each other, forcing everyone to shout everything that was said in order to be heard over their own echoes. Mistress Kaya tried to explain about the dangers Bolas and the Eternals presented to Ravnica, the guilds, and the Planeswalkers. Pontiff Marov, amidst an elaborate apology to his new Planeswalking Guildmaster, didn't see why Planeswalkers should be of any concern to the Orzhov.
Still, I am happy to issue a church edict condemning the Eternals' harvesting of these Planeswalker sparks. Is that the correct term? Well, no matter. We'll play with the wording.
Tithe Master Zoltan couldn't quite justify the expense of joining the battle.
Tithes have been down in these difficult times, and it hasn't helped that you keep forgiving debts, Guildmaster. Let's allow things to settle, shall we? The economics of the war may look much better after it's over. A rebuilding phase in the city always brings in more revenue.
Mistress Maladola was the only one of the 3 who seemed even vaguely inclined to help. In any case, she briefly spoke of her itch to join the fight, but Tithe Master Zoltan shot her a raised eyebrow look, and Pontiff Marov shook his jowly head very slightly, and the executioner quickly changed her tune.
If our new guildmaster would lead the charge, I'm sure the church executioners would be pleased to provide her with an honor guard, at least to accompany her to the summit meeting at the Azorius Senate.
I don't need a token guard. I can take care of myself. You're missing the...
Please, Guildmaster. We insist. Do we not?
Tithe Master Zoltan and Pontiff Marov concurred that they did, with the vampire adding,
Appearances at least mandate you be accompanied as far as the Senate House.
And no farther. Mistress Kaya glowered so hotly, I thought she might catch fire.
Listen to me. You don't seem to comprehend the danger this entire world is facing.
I imagine if things are that grave, the Living Guild Pact will finally show his face and solve things.
Balerion has shown his face. He's here and fighting, alongside the rest of us. He's part of this Gatewatch organization that I gather guards the multiverse from threats like Bolas. He and another planeswalker, Gideon Jura, are doing their best to lead the forces opposing Bolas. But as Living Guild Pact, he's lost his authority, his powers. He can't just fix this for us. It's up to...
Without his authority and power, what use is the man?
Indeed. Why would we follow someone who squandered such opportunities?
Perhaps the most prudent thing would be to pull back our forces to a defensible position here at the Cathedral Opulent and wait things out. In a few days, the situation may look very different.
In a few days, the situation may look irretrievable.
Well, I suppose we'll know soon enough, Guildmaster.
We exited the cabinet together, more or less. The Triumvirate were eager to go their several ways, but was delayed when the Pontiff and the Tithe Master's thralls got their leashes all tangled. While they were sorting that out, with almost comic difficulty, I heard a loud stomping sound from behind me. Turning, I saw an armored giant, 12 feet tall with a helm that revealed no features whatsoever, approach Mistress Kaya.
Guildmaster, I am Balaru, Chief Enforcer for the Church Militant.
I was told you might require my services.
Well, Guildmaster, perhaps we can build your honor guard around this great pillar.
Both Mistress Kaya and the giant ignored her.
You're an enforcer, charged with collecting syndicate debts?
Precisely, Guildmaster.
Would you not agree, then, that the guild's debts would be considerably more difficult to collect if the Dragon's Eternals murder every debtor on Ravnica, along with every debtor's offspring? Not to mention every member of the syndicate.
Mr. Billigrew nodded down at her and grumbled.
Ghosts and spirits have run things inside Orzhova for so long, everyone forgets that most of the collecting's done by the living. I can take my enforcers, and what I can raise of the Syndicate's military might, out into the streets, to protect Orzhov investments.
That, Chief Enforcer, would be much appreciated by your guildmaster.
I live to serve.
I don't think that
will... Oh, there is, of course, another alternative. I can render all debt collection moot by forgiving every single debt this instant.
The pontiff, looking slightly panicked, immediately and literally backed off, nearly tripping over his tangled thrall in the process.
No, Guildmaster, nothing that extreme will be necessary.
Much that is extreme will be necessary before this day is out.
With the thralls finally untangled, the Triumvirate took their leave. Mistress Kaya turned to Teo and me.
Time to go.
I felt very important, and also pretty lonely, as I entered the Senate House at Mistress Kaya and Teo's side. I longed to find Hekara among the crowd, to find it had all been a big mistake and she was still alive. But not only was she not there, no one from the cult of Rakdos had shown up from the summit. We were told that Lord Rakdos blamed Master Zarek, Mistress Kaya, Miss Lavinia, and Mistress Vraska, who wasn't there either, for the death of emissary Hekara, and had declined to send any representative at all in protest. Likewise, with Mistress Vraska gone, there was no one from the Golgari swarm, and word was spreading through the chamber that Dum Domri was dead. Turns out he was a planeswalker and got his spark harvested by an Eternal. Akamal and the twins had gone with him. I wondered if they were dead too. Anyway, nobody was here from the Gruul clans either. Since both Golgari and Gruul had been left leaderless, with no one, or maybe too many, stepping up to take charge, I suppose they couldn't summon up anyone for the summit. House Demir also appeared to be a no-show, and the Selesnya Conclave had retreated behind their borders, meaning half of the 10 guilds were providing absolutely no help to the cause. Look, if Gateless Me is the only person even close to being a Gruul, Rakdos, or Selesnyan ambassador, we're all in trouble. Presentable, I'm not. Things weren't much better with the other guilds either. The Azorius Senate Guildmaster, the already infamous Dovin Baan, had, like Mistress Vraska, been working with Bolas. He wasn't attending the summit, even in his own seat of power. Miss Lavinia and a few old-school Azorius were here, having formally disavowed Baan and his leadership, but they had no real authority over their guild. The bylaws of the Senate still listed Baan as Guildmaster, and the Azorius do love their bylaws. And the Orzhov Syndicate? Well, Mistress Kaya got the honor guard she hadn't asked for, and I guess Chief Billigrew had taken his enforcers into the streets to kill Eternals. But otherwise, Matriarch Karlov and the Triumvirate were barely paying lip service to being on their guildmaster's side. As Master Zarek said,
the Orzhov are stingy about paying anything, lip service included.
All told, that meant only the Izzet League, led by Master Zarek and Chamberlain Marie, the Boros Legion, led by its guildmaster, Mistress Aurelia, and the Simic Combine, led by Mr. Vorel, theoretically with the full support of his guildmaster, Prime Speaker Vanifar, had shown up in force. I was eavesdropping on Master Zarek, still honoring Hekara's request for no good reason, when he spoke to Chamberlain Marie.
50% won't be enough no matter how we squeeze this, will it?
I'm sorry, Guildmaster, but even 90% won't be enough. We tried to play percentages last time. When Niv Mizzet was alive, we might have been able to get by with 8 to 10 guilds. With him dead...
So Master Niv Mizzet's dead too. Seemed like there were all sorts of folk I'd seen recently. Hekara, Niv Mizzet, Dum Domri, who went off and died shortly thereafter. I decided to stick as close as possible to Teo and Mistress Kaya.
With the Fire Mine dead, the only option is Operation Desperation.
Operation Desperation?
And for that to succeed, you'll need cooperation from 10 of 10 guilds. There can be no exceptions.
Master Zarek nodded.
Bring me options.
He didn't exactly look hopeful that there'd be any, but the Chamberlain nodded curtly and dutifully walked away. Mr. Jura and Mr. Beleren were standing in front of the late Mistress Esperia, former Guildmaster of the Azorius Senate, current statue decorating the Senate Hall. I was eavesdropping again. And you don't have to tell me it's a nasty habit. I already know. But it's also a useful habit. At times, a necessary one.
Sphinxes. Bigger troublemakers than dragons.
Mr. Jura raised an eyebrow.
So then all dragons but one.
Didn't know you had such a problem with sphinxes.
Alhammaret, Azor, Esperia. Never met a sphinx who wasn't arrogant, aloof, pain in my...
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Esperia did a lot of good on Ravnica. In fact, if Vraska hadn't turned her to stone, we might be in a much better...
Vraska's vengeance was well earned. You don't know her. You don't know her story.
I suppose I don't.
It occurred to me then that Mr. Beleren was at least a little bit in love with Mistress Vraska. I thought about that and figured they'd make a really cute couple. Mr. Jura put a calming hand on Mr. Beleren's shoulder. At first, the latter gentleman looked about ready to knock it off, but he took a deep breath and even managed a weak smile.
We need to get to it. The longer we're sequestered in here, the more damage Bolus and his army can do out there. So take a minute. Compose your thoughts and let's call this meeting to order.
Mr. Beleren nodded and started to walk away, before pausing.
You're a good friend, Gideon. I don't know if I've ever told you that.
I'm quite sure you haven't. But to be fair, I don't think I've ever said it to you either. I'm a little bit ashamed you beat me to it, old friend.
Mr. Beleren smiled again, looking simultaneously boyish and old. He was lean, fit, tan, and apparently in love. But the weight of Bolus's attack clearly weighed on his slightly stooped shoulders, and it revealed the age in his face. Watching him go, Mr. Jura straightened his back and then turned to scan the crowd, which was short on guild representation, but heavy on planeswalkers, including himself and Mr. Beleren, Master Zarek, Mistress Kaya, Teo, and many, many more. Many whose names I hadn't yet caught. One of the planeswalkers had even brought his dog, who had 2 tails and the softest fur. Mr. Dak Faden, a local psychometrist and thief, whose excellent work in the latter discipline I'd been surreptitiously studying for the last couple of years, turned out to be another planeswalker, kinda explaining how I'd lost track of him on more than one occasion. He was flirting a bit with Miss Rye, complimenting her on the style and cut of her dress, while eyeing the gold filigree jewelry she wore all over her person. She appeared both flattered and cautious, which seemed appropriate. Mr. Beleren returned, nodding to Mr. Jura, who nodded back. It was time, I suppose. So I scurried back over to Teo and Mistress Kaya.
So, what were you talking about over there?
I listened more than I talked. He smiled at me.
You listened? Really?
I elbowed him in the ribs.
Ow.
But he didn't lose the smile. It's a very nice smile. Oh boy. Don't get used to it, Arathia. He's a walker, and when this fight's over, he's just gonna walk away. Together, we watched Mr. Beleren and Mr. Jura step up to the front of the dais. Mr. Beleren enhanced his voice magically to fill the hall.
Let's bring this to order, please. We need a plan.
And you two strategic geniuses think you can come up with one?
It came from a demon man in the corner, a planeswalker. Ob Nixilis, they called him, and most everyone was giving him a wide berth, except Mr. Pencil Mustache Planeswalker, who had earlier made a sincere effort, with insincere motives maybe, to buddy up with old Mr. Ugly Ob. A low buzz rose up from the crowd. No one seemed to like the Demon Man, but it was clear plenty shared his opinion. Mr. Beleren's tenure as the Living Guild Pact had been inconsistent, and his leadership wasn't universally recognized by Ravnicans. Or by Planeswalkers, apparently.
There'll be time for everyone to have their say. But standing around muttering to each other isn't getting us anywhere. So how about we stow the snide comments for the time being and listen?
There was another, briefer collective murmur, but that was followed by an uneasy silence Mr. Beleren took advantage of.
We face a number of problems. 5, to be exact. Some of you are aware of all of them, but many have only just arrived and haven't had the opportunity to get your heads around the whole picture. So let me offer some clarity now.
He shot a glance at Master Zarek, who shrugged.
1. The Izzet Beacon is luring more and more planeswalkers to Ravnica, where they run the risk of becoming more fuel for Bolas's power.
As if on cue, another planeswalker materialized in the middle of the crowd amid a flash of turquoise light. He was an older man with turquoise eyes and a carefully trimmed white beard. Mr. Jura leaned over and whispered something to Mr. Beleren, but I was too far away to hear.
We need to disable the beacon, which is under Izzet and Azorius Guard at the aptly named Beacon Tower. Getting there may be difficult, but the real problem is the machine itself, which was built with safeguards to prevent Bolas from shutting it off.
Brilliant.
Snorted the planeswalking minotaur I'd seen materialize in the plaza earlier that day.
How you fools love to play right into the dragon's claws.
Miss Watley countered from across the room.
As you did by coming here.
The minotaur snorted again, but said nothing more. I decided I liked Miss Watley quite a bit.
Problem number 2. The Immortal Sun. Once the beacon summons the planeswalkers to Ravnica, the sun keeps them trapped here. So, like the beacon, we need to shut the sun down. It's not far from here, one of the new Prov towers, being guarded by the new Azorius Guildmaster, Dovin Baan, who we've learned is a pawn of Nicol Bolas. 3. The planar bridge from Amonkhet allows a seemingly endless army of Eternals to enter Ravnica and slay planeswalkers lured by the beacon and held by the sun. We have to shut it down, and we can only do that from the Amonkhet side.
Miss Samu called out.
I've tried to planeswalk back to Amonkhet, but the Immortal Sun...
I know, and we can't wait for Problem 2 to be solved, so we'll utilize the portal itself to travel to Amonkhet.
Miss Ballard scoffed.
While the Eternals march out of it? That sounds like a great plan for committing suicide.
Mr. Beleren actually smiled at this.
There are steps we could take to make it only a mediocre plan for committing suicide.
I'm game.
Mr. Beleren thanked her with another smile. But, turning to Mr. Jura, his smile quickly faded. And when he spoke again, it was as if he was addressing his next point to Mr. Jura alone. As if he half expected him to challenge him on it.
Problem 4, Liliana Vess. She's clearly controlling the Eternals for Bolas.
Ah, Miss Ravenhair's name is Liliana Vess. Good to know.
We need to make sure she can't do that anymore. Ever.
Mr. Jura said nothing.
Finally, 5, Bolas himself. Though, if we can't deal with the first 4 problems, the 5th is pretty damn hopeless.
Another general murmur pretty much echoed the sense of hopelessness. Mr. Jura stepped forward.
There's a 6th problem. We have a responsibility to protect ordinary Ravnicans, since none would be in danger if not for Bolas's hunger for planeswalker sparks.
Mr. Beleren put a hand on his shoulder.
That's right. 6 problems.
7. We need to reconstitute the Guild Pact by uniting all 10 guilds. Without the Guild Pact's combined might, we'll never truly stand a chance against the dragon.
You tried that already.
Mr. Vorel pointed at Mr. Suspiria's remains.
Look at the result. Ispiria's dead. And today you couldn't even assemble representatives of all 10 guilds during Ravnica's greatest moment of crisis. What in the world makes you think you can reconstitute the Guild Pact now?
Another wave of murmurs threatened to become a roar, but Master Zarek enhanced his own voice with magic. It buzzed and crackled as he spoke over the crowd.
I'm honestly not sure we can, but we must try. The Firemind left behind one final stratagem. It's a bit desperate.
More desperate than his last stratagem?
Yes, in fact. But it might be our only chance.
Alright. 7 goals, or 6 anyway, if we're going to subtract going after Bolas for the time being. I propose splitting up our collective forces to achieve these goals.
The murmuring instantly started up again, and the buzz was less than enthusiastic. One planeswalker, an Aven whose name I didn't know, said,
What if we surrendered? Throw ourselves on the mercy of Bolas?
Mr. Faden turned to the Aven.
I don't think Bolas is the merciful type. You probably didn't see it, but a planeswalker named Domri Raid attempted to switch sides and join up with the dragon. He was the first planeswalker harvested.
Another planeswalker, a woman with jet black hair and glowing green eyes, spoke.
Then let's go into hiding. At some point, Bolas himself will want to planeswalk. He'll have Bond shut off the Immortal Sun, and we'll all escape.
That is your solution? Hide and abandon Ravnica to the Eternals and the Dragon? You planeswalkers are the reason Bolas is here. The reason Ravnica is in danger.
He turned to the Aven.
But I like your idea. The surrender, an enforced surrender, if necessary, of your type would allow Bolas to eat his fill. Once sated, he'll leave Ravnica alone.
Bolas is never sated.
It was yet another planeswalker, a woman carrying a longbow. An equally bitter Miss Samud agreed.
That is the truth.
Fine. But let me make this clear, planeswalkers. If you hide while Ravnica burns, you will find little help or succor from its citizens and guilds.
Maybe we should surrender.
Mr. Beleren looked quite exasperated. I kind of felt sorry for him, you know? Miss Samud stepped forward.
Gideon Jura, it is noble of you to wish to make such a sacrifice, but do not forget the fate of Amonkhet.
She turned to face the crowd.
Bolas left my world completely desolated. Even now, a mere handful of survivors struggle to defeat the monsters that Nicol Bolas left behind to slaughter us. Bolas will not leave Ravnica as he found it.
Bolas is never sated. There is literally nothing left of my world, Scala, thanks to him. The dragon must die.
There were shouts of
Aye!
At this, followed by more shouts that were, less supportive and less polite. It was all falling apart. Miss Lavinia spoke up.
One thing is certain. If we fight among ourselves, we stand no chance against Bolas.
Mistress Aurelia shouted.
Hear, hear! The fate of Amonkhet and Scala must not befall Ravnica.
I noticed Mr. Goldmane reach out a hand to Mr. Jura, who took it and stepped down off the dais.
Remember your oath, the oath of the Gatewatch. Surrender is not the answer, my friend. The Archer is right, and you know it. One such as Bolas will never be sated, nor will he show mercy. He views such things as weakness, and any attempt at such an appeal would only enhance his appetites.
Mr. Jura took this in and nodded. Then he made his way to the center of the crowd, moving among the planeswalkers and gilded alike.
Now that you know of our existence, you could be forgiven for believing our ability to traverse worlds is an excuse for a planeswalker to always run from a fight. But we of the Gatewatch took an oath to always stay. It was a choice we had the luxury to make, and somehow we thought that choice made us superior. Now we stand among you with that choice taken from us. Now the choice is whether to fight.
He unsheathed his black broadsword with a considerable amount of flair.
This is Blackblade. It has already slain one Elder Dragon, and it can destroy Bolas as well. With it, I hereby vow to take back this world. Who's with me?
His speech roused the whole crowd, or nearly all of it. Folks began to gather around him. Mr. Goldmane put a hand on his shoulder, and that simple gesture seemed to act as a kind of trigger. From every side, planeswalkers and Ravnicans reached out their hands to touch Mr. Jura, or, if farther back, like Teo, Mistress Kaya, and me, to touch someone touching him, as if to draw strength from the strength of his conviction. It was kind of great. We all had a real moment there for a second or two. Well, all of us but Mr. Faden, who snuck up behind Miss Kiora to poach a bare-handed touch of her fancy, shiny Bident with his psychometry, And wound up looking a bit like he regretted every single life choice he ever made. I was kind of giggling over that when a small Izzet goblin entered from a balcony door.
Bastards! One of them corny turners approaches. It's the head of a small army of those undead creepates. You got about 11.5 minutes for these here.
6 challenges, 6 missions. We need volunteers now.
Mistress Kaya stepped forward, but Master Zarek intercepted her.
I need your help for Mission 7.
Sorry, I lost count. Which one's 7?
Operation Desperation.
Thank you for listening to this production of Voice of All. As listener-supported entertainment, we rely on you not just for the voices of the characters, but also to keep us going and growing. If you enjoyed what you heard, please support us by rating and reviewing us on iTunes, or following us on Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, or just plain sharing with your friends. You can also support us financially on Patreon for exclusive perks. Rallying the Reluctant was written by Greg Weisman. The podcast was produced and edited by Gendo Okeshi, with sound editing by Noxshade. This week's story featured the voice talents of Madison Dabbs, Isa Martell, Voodoo Sudu, Ozzy Snedden, Eli Lewis, Sharon Grunwald, E.L. Robertson, Mycroftian, Abigail Turner, David Ford, Ragna, Penny, Ryan Yoshitani, Caitlin Buckley, Christina Edelman, Inra Zyro, Malachi Gospodarski, Kit Harrison, Alex Oakley, Fox, Stephanie Malia Morris, Mertia, Emily Doms, J.W. Forsyth, and Jared Rahman. Voice of All is unofficial fan content, permitted under the Wizards of the Coast fan content policy. Magic the Gathering is copyright Wizards of the Coast. Thanks so much for listening. And y'all have a great day.
By switching to AAA insurance, we're able to save over $450. More gas in our car for driving up north to go camp. You do s'mores. You can't lose the s'mores.
Find out how much you could save. Contact the Auto Club for a free auto insurance quote today.
This might be a bad idea.
No matter your size, shape, or sleeping style, you've never felt a pillow like this. The Purple Harmony Pillow, the world's first and only pillow with Purple Grid Hex. The coolest, comfiest innovation ever put into a pillow. It instantly adapts to your head and neck for total, no-pressure support. With 1,500 airways in the Purple Grid and ventilated Talalay latex, you're always on the cool side of the pillow. The Purple Harmony Pillow, the greatest pillow ever invented. Get yours at purple.com.
This story is brought to your ears by all our fantastic supporters on Patreon. To get in on the action yourself with bloopers, extras, and the occasional early story, join us at patreon.com/voiceofallmtg. We'd like to thank our newest patrons, Jay Pizzle, Callum, Riversong, Meat Reaver, Peter Samet, and Christian Amora for already donating. For more stories or just to chat, visit voiceofallmtg.com. And now, Voice of All presents Desperate Operatives, Episode 4 of War of the Spark.
Finding a way to recruit the Azorius Senate, with its evil dragon collaborating guildmaster Dovin Bond, and to contact House Demir, with its mysterious shape-shifting guildmaster Lazav, was assigned, I suppose, to other volunteers. But Master Zarek and Mr. Beleren tasked Mistress Kaya with bringing the other 4 wayward guilds, the Golgari Swarm, the Cult of Rakdos, the Gruul Clans, and the Selesnya Conclave, to the table for Operation Desperation. Whatever that is. They claimed that as an outsider, she'd bring less baggage and suspicion to the endeavor than Master Zarek himself would. But as a guildmaster, she'd still bring enough authority and prestige to command, or at least be granted, the necessary audiences with each guild. I could see Mistress Kaya was reluctant, dubious of her chances of success. I leaned over and whispered for her to accept. I can help you with Gruul, Selesnya, and I was about to add Rakdos, but stopped myself. With Hekara gone, I no longer had an in with the cult. Yeah, with Gruul and Selesnya. Our first stop would be Selesnya, which Mistress Kaya hoped would be the easiest of the four. Teo and I were with her, of course. I say, of course, but it's strange that it feels so automatic. We became her loyal entourage in a matter of hours. And Miss Nissa Ravane came along with us too.